Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And apologies for the couple of false starts over the weekend. Ian McGregor's show, I will reschedule it as soon as he's available again. And the one about Lend-Lease, it'll all be a matter of when I can get in touch with Dennis again. He's very, very busy and his internet connection was a bit weird on Sunday, but we will bring that show as soon as we can. But here we are talking about female snipers. We're continuing our look at the Eastern Front. My guest today, Dr. Lyuba Vinogradova, was born in Moscow and as a translator has worked with Anthony Beaver and Max Hastings, but she's here to talk about one of her own books on World War II, Avenging Angels, about the Soviet women snipers, and I can't wait to bring her in. So good afternoon, good evening. How are you today?
Good evening, Paul. I'm great, and you?
I'm very good. So this is a subject it's just all over the world. I mean, when I did my preparation for this show, I mean, I just said to you a minute ago before we went live there, I found 11 video games online that have female snipers in them. There's novels, there's video games, there's movies, TV shows. It has become something that everybody's talking about or has been talking about the last few years, but it was unknown for sort of outside of the Soviet Union for a long time. Tell me about what your journey to wanting to write about this subject and set the record straight about the real heroes and perhaps the fake heroes. So how did you get to this position where you wanted to write about the snipers?
I suppose my perspective was exactly the same as yours, and probably the same as of many of the members of our audience tonight. I felt that it's a fascinating subject. It's, if I may say so, it's quite sexy. Young women carrying death. So it's this morbid fascination with a young creature bringing death. I read that they had the same hormonal shifts, hormonal perks when they scored a kill, and they felt depressed just like men did when they failed. So it was at first it was just called fascination, and of course hope to make a good book, to write a successful book. But then, of course, because they were still alive and I got to meet them, then of course you realize that the story is not at all like that they were same age as my son now. They were 17, 18 years old, and when they were sent to study, they had no idea what a sniper is. They had no idea what their military profession was going to be. Their post-war life, if they survived, was extremely hard, was full of hardships. So there was nothing sexy either in their work in the war or in their post-war life. So one feels actually quite bitter about this fascination now. I understand very well where it comes from, but the story is not like that.
Well, that's what we've brought you on to talk about. So you've come armed with a PowerPoint, which I'll be in charge of. So just tell me when to move on to the next slide. So this is it. I mean, everyone knows about the female snipers, but now from you, we're going to hear some of the truth and separate the truth from the fiction. And I can't wait to get started. And folks, if you have questions, please feel free to put them as we go along. We will do them as we go along, and any big ones we can do at the end. But I'm going to hand over to my guest to learn about Soviet female snipers. So over to you, Lyuba.
Please do ask questions, folks, and Paul, please, you're welcome to interrupt with the question, because I'm not very structured. My presentation is, I apologize for the quality of my presentation. It's rubbish. So feel free to guide me, make it more structured with questions that you may have. So I'd like to start with the first day of the German invasion of Russia, which we Russians call the first day of the Great Patriotic War, the 22nd of June 1941, when people, of course, had a huge huge mixture of emotions. It was both shock and fear, especially in part of the older generation who'd survived the Civil War, for example, and terrible hardships. And strangely enough, a great enthusiasm for war, because the Soviet propaganda had brought up several generations of people who believed that the war was not going to last more than 2 weeks and that the enemy would be beaten on their own territory. So the young people were queuing at the call-up committees in order to volunteer for the army. And spectators, participants of those events, mentioned that numbers of young women among those people were unprecedented. There were huge numbers of women trying to volunteer, and many of them had military training because throughout the 1930s, the country, the society was so militarized that people, young people, especially in the cities, young people trained at various paramilitary organizations, and many women were among them. Some were trained as pilots. There were marksmen. Can I say markswoman?
Markswoman, yeah, yeah.
Markswomen, etc., etc. So these people came to the call-up committees confident that they will be allowed to serve in the army. And it was a huge shock when most of them were turned away in the first days of the war, saying that we don't need women. It was a huge insult, it was a shock. The only women that were getting called up on those first days were military nurses and doctors who already had experience from the Finnish war. And actually, most of those people had no desire to serve, to fight, because they'd seen terrible things, seen terrible horrors. And apart from that, apart from seeing the blood and the death, they'd seen terrible incompetence of the commanders. So they were not keen. And they definitely were the people that knew that the war would last more than 2 weeks.
Mm.
And many of them had families already, but didn't have any choice but to go.
And that's an interesting question, because you said that unprecedented numbers of women went to go and volunteer and then were turned down. But you also said that there was an expectation that perhaps the war wouldn't last very long. So that brings the question that, of course, if you're a young woman going off, you're probably not expecting to be away for, as some of them were, 4, maybe 5 years away. So they were assuming it was going to be a swifter affair, you think?
Absolutely, and they wanted both to defend their country and to earn some glory. Young people dream of glory, so that's this was the view of many young people queuing on those first days at the call-up committees. In the next slide, however, is one of older people who also volunteered. She was called Nina Petrova, and she'd served as a nurse in the Finnish war. But she was actually an amazing athlete and markswoman who immediately volunteered, was turned down, volunteered again, and after being accepted as a nurse, managed to get herself a sniper's job eventually in the army. She was my age, actually. She was 48, 49 years old already. And she had a granddaughter. So her motivation was to defend her granddaughter. And she got killed, unfortunately, closer to the end of the war. But she was quite an amazing person, special person from Leningrad.
And you talked about the fact that she eventually became a sniper, because this is one of the things that I find in my reading about it is obviously at the beginning of World War II, there were no female snipers. And at the end of the war, there were, because they were organized units. But exactly how units were established seems to be quite vague, because people were seemingly doing it before it was an official thing. And then it became an official thing. So when you were researching the book, how difficult was it to kind of find the date when women snipers becomes a thing? Because obviously, as I said, it had been happening unofficially before. So when would you count it as being actually something starting?
Well, it didn't start till 1943. The girls that we'll see in the next picture, they also joined these beautiful girls that died when they were not even 20 years old, I think. Natasha Kovchova and Masha Polivanova. They were accepted in July 1941 as volunteers, not as snipers, but they did have sniper training. So their division left Moscow on the most critical day, on the 16th of October 1941, when Moscow was under threat from the Germans, and fought for half a year. They were in the Demyansk pocket, where the Red Army managed to achieve the first encirclement of that war. Battles, clashes alternated with periods of defense. So snipers are normally active when situation is calm. Their role basically is to terrorize the adversary. But these people, these girls, did take part in a clash eventually, and were left behind together with a soldier whose surname was Novikov, who later told the story. All three of them were wounded, and according to Novikov, when the Germans approached them, Natasha kissed Masha goodbye and blew both of them and some German soldiers with a grenade. Then it all went quiet. Nobody talked about them for about 6 months, till the time came to recruit women into the army, simply because the losses of men were so great that the country somehow had to make up for it. And in 1943, hundreds of thousands of women were called up, most, of course, to roles less heroic than those of snipers, but also as snipers. And then this story was all over the newspapers. This story of a partisan, Zoya Kosmodemyatskaya, who'd set an entire village on fire, leaving people in the middle of the winter without roof over their heads, and was executed by the Germans and tortured.
So we have a question from Benjamin Allen there about which one is Masha in the photo and who is the other person with her.
I'm so sorry. So the picture on the left is Natasha Kovshova, who was the stronger personality of the two, more developed, more intellectual, and she's on the right in the second photo. Masha Polivanova is on the left. Right. A village girl, not very educated, absolutely devoted to Natasha, who she adored.
But returning to Demyansk pocket, because we talked about the pocket last Thursday with Sergei, and it was a really fascinating battle, because both the Red Army and the German army were defending and attacking at the same time. It was a complicated, typical of that mid period of the war, when it's transitional. You know, the Germans are no longer completely controlled, but they're still very organized and sorted out. The Soviet army is not yet the beast it was to become later in the war. So it's very interesting period of the war. So the need for snipers there, do you think it was born on the battlefield out of need, or did it come from a higher level in terms of commanders saying we need to have this asset? Is it something born out of low level or from a higher command, or a bit of both?
Look, they realized in the process what a valuable figure a sniper is, a precious figure, because one of the women told me how they arrived at their sector of the front, and the Germans were terrified. They shot one, they shot another one. And from then on, the Germans would not show themselves, would not show their faces over the edge of the trench. You know, they were terrified, and of course, it has a huge effect on the spirits of the soldiers. That's the role of the sniper. Of course, they also hunt for the commanders, for the officers. Of course, a unit without a commander is not a unit, but I think their main role is to terrorize the enemy, the adversary. So the Soviets realized during the process that actually people with soldiers with snipers training are very, very valuable, and then they started sending the snipers sights to the units. Officers began asking the soldiers for people who have sniper training, and even they started organizing this kind of training directed the units during the periods of lull. Actually, this was how this older woman, Nina Petrova, started her career as a sniper at the front. She first was training the soldiers, and then she started taking them to the front line for missions, and also was shooting herself.
Brilliant stuff. And when we'll move on to photos. The idea you said about at the beginning in your introduction about the idea of the sexy female sniper being out there, very kind of a romantic, idealized vision of it. But actually, when you read your book or other people's books, it's a very, very lonely job. It's lots and lots of time on your own. It's cold. The conditions were terrible. And as we know, that the rations and things like that weren't particularly good at the beginning. The rifles weren't particularly good towards the beginning. So what were the qualities that you think, in your speaking to these women and the men that were alongside them, was there one particular quality that the Soviets were looking for that made a good sniper? Is it patience? Obviously, the skill with the rifle is integral to it, but you can train someone to be skillful. But what do you think was the single quality that started establishing itself among these snipers?
Well, later in the war, when they started setting up these special platoons of snipers, before which they were training them at the special sniper school, they were simply choosing very healthy girls with perfect eyesight.
Right.
That's it. And then I suppose some of them proved themselves unsuitable for the role during the training, others during the war. So I suppose the 20 or so people that I was lucky enough to meet were the ones that persevered and indeed proved themselves as really good snipers.
Right.
Let me say a few words about these two women.
Please do.
They were same division, same volunteer division as Natasha Kovshova and Masha Polivanova. They're very different. They're just in the same picture because they were in the same division, and they were some of the earliest snipers. By the time that Natasha and Masha died, which was in the summer of 1942, both of them were gravely wounded and no longer at the front. But they also, having started not as snipers, managed to get a sniper role in their unit. The first one is the only Uzbek woman decorated with the Star of Hero of the Soviet Union. And she's absolutely remarkable. She was a ballerina, Ziba Ganieva. She was an extremely beautiful girl, ballerina, who volunteered, who served as a sniper, who was gravely wounded, barely survived. So after that, she couldn't go back to the ballet school. And she became a philologist. She became a very famous scholar. But she was such an actress. She had such a passion for acting that she acted in 2 or 3 feature films.
Wow.
Quite remarkable. The second woman, called Nina Solovey, who was in her early 20s, i.e. older than most others. She was also wounded, and after the hospital decided that she still wanted to serve in the army. And she was sent to train snipers at the newly formed, newly opened first in the world Central School of Sniper Training near Moscow, Podolsk. So she was one of the teachers, and she was one of the instructors that took her trainees to the front.
Brilliant. We'll move
The
on.
next,
Yeah.
yeah, let's move on. I just wanted to mention another person who also served from late, if I'm not mistaken, from late 1942. She was called Lydia Bakieva, and she. Among those that I met, she was definitely the number one sniper. Forget Pavlichenko; she was the real. It was the real thing. She had the passion for the job. She was a markswoman before the war. She continued taking part in the competitions after the war. She volunteered in 1941 after her husband of a few months or weeks, even Volodya, was called up to the army, and he never came back. He went missing at some stage, and she volunteered. She managed to break into the sniper school. She served at the front. She had a passion for the job. She was the only one probably of those that I met that would do things that not many men would do: go to no man's land in the small hours of the morning, lie till it was light, um, shoot, crawl back once it got dark. Of course, you don't move, right? You don't move.
Yeah.
You pee into your trousers. You lie in the snow. And she was the one that talked about feeling happy when she scored a kill, and depressed when she didn't. Um, and interestingly, it's very interesting. By the way, the most terrifying story of all for me was how she was once, when she was serving at the first Belarusian front, she realized that she's not far from the place where Volodya was when he sent her his last letter. So one night she just couldn't sleep. She whatever happens, she wanted to go and look for him, and she went out. It was March, so the snow had melted and exposed the dead that lay in the field, the dead soldiers. And she was walking alone through this field at night, looking into the faces in the moonlight, looking into the faces of the soldiers, of the dead soldiers, turning over to see the faces, looking for her husband that she never heard from again.
Wow.
So when I met her, she was in her late 80s. She was probably 89, and she was extremely feminine. She was extremely active, all alone, completely alone. She didn't have family. Extremely active and extremely feminine. She was wearing a beautiful pair of golden slippers when she met me. Lots of makeup, really extraordinarily well groomed elderly lady. And if you look at her photos in her during the war years, she is so masculine. She looks just like a man.
Wow.
She wore her hair very, very short. She deliberately didn't do anything to look prettier. You see this. I don't have any photo in the presentation, unfortunately. I'm sorry about this. But you see this this completely unfeminine, thin, dark face. This her cold eyes. She'd say that there was no place for that during the war. You just had to do your job. You had to bring the war to an end. And her method for doing that was killing the enemies, for the war to end quicker. And
Wow.
She was terribly offended when she and a group of other girls were ordered to clean a house where the commandos were going to stay. She was so offended that actually she refused, and she was punished for that. But that's just an illustration of her attitude.
And that's you touched on two things there that I want to talk to you about. One is the fact that they're in an environment that is mostly men, so they're expected to be subservient and do the cleaning and do the cooking, but also I'm guessing unwanted sexual advances was something that they had to deal with every day. So I can imagine them keeping their hair short and things like that, and trying to look unfeminine would help you blend into the background. When you spoke to these women, was that a big problem back in the war of just trying to retain your dignity when there's men around you all the time?
Well, I suppose it's their greatest pain, and I suppose it's not something that most of them talked about. But it's I'm 100% sure that actually this was sexual abuse was the central theme for them of the war. They went to the war. The society was so patriarchal; they'd never kissed a boy, and most of them. I was not told this, but I'm sure this was the case. Most of them had relationships during the war simply because there was no other way. There had been lots of rape. We don't know how much, again, because people don't talk about this.
Yeah, of course.
Those who were in all women's units were lucky because they could somehow protect each other.
Safety in numbers. Yeah. And the other, well, thanks for sharing that. The other question I want to bring up is that the elephant in the room is Pavlyuchenko, because the female sniper everyone knows the most about, the one who's mostly in the video games, there's been a movie. She's not in your presentation because essentially you think she's a fake. She's the one who famously went to the USA and met Eleanor Roosevelt. So without dwelling on it for too long, but just because people will only ask about her, what you think she's basically a fraud?
Let her stay in the video games.
Yeah.
This woman. No, I don't think she meant it this way, but she was in this maritime army in 1942 that such a tragedy happened to it in Sevastopol. They were basically forced to die or surrender, and she emerged soon after that, and she claims that she scored by that time 187 kills, actually it was very upsetting for my real snipers that I interviewed. They describe a day how they sit for an entire day in the snow hoping to score one kill, not 12, just one. If you score one, you're very lucky. You're the victor. You're the winner. And none of her kills are documented. She was very glib. She was good looking. She had a good sense of humor. She spoke extremely well. So when they needed somebody to send to America, and she played a colossal role in raising the funds and changing the attitudes in the UK.
I was going to make that point. She may not have been the sniper she and other people claim she was, but as a link between Russia and the USA in a tricky period, it all connects with Lend-Lease and war aid and support and public opinion. She was very, very important. But yeah, when I read about her, I just kind of rolled my eyes at when she'd come back with 23 kills in one sitting. You think this is movies. This is silly. But anyway, we'll move back to these real women that you want to talk about, and the sniper school, and then we'll carry on moving through your photos. It's wonderful. We're loving it so far. So back to you.
Thank you. So they set up the school, and whereas the first small group of graduates that included Lydia Bakieva were probably most of them volunteers. The second lot were not volunteers at all, and I didn't realize myself what had happened, because everybody writes in their memoirs, I volunteered. And then you talk to people and you realize that actually almost none of the female veterans that I interviewed were actually volunteers. There was that huge campaign started by the Central Committee of the Komsomol of the Communist Youth in 1943 to conscript women, to call up women. to make up for the numbers. And when they came, when they received the call-up notice and turned up, they were told, "Would you like to sign up as a volunteer? It will be much better for you." And from then on, and their entire lives, they would repeat the same story, that they were volunteers. But just like my great aunt, who was Shura, who died just 2 months ago at the age of 97, who served in the war as well. She had no desire. Shura was 18 years old. She was a school teacher, uh, the only teacher in a village school, from a family where all the brothers went to the war. She had no desire. She had no option. She didn't want to abandon everything that she was doing. But she received the notice, and when she came, the commissar said, "Shall we sign you up as a volunteer?" And she said, "Yes, why not?" And that's the story. So I've heard it many times. So unfortunately, folks will never find out how many true volunteers there had been. There'll be no such statistics,
Well,
unfortunately.
well,
It's
thanks
very
for
sad.
explaining.
So most of them, most of the people that received the notices, were like this girl in the striped dress, Kaleria, who was 19. She, in fact, she was saved by this sniper school because she'd been working. She'd been called up to work in a military plant, um, and the conditions were not as good there as they were at the sniper school. You basically were a slave. You worked for 10 hours a day. You had a day off once a week, or sometimes once in 2 weeks, and the food rations were really, really poor. So she was starving. She was just starving. She'd come to visit her aunt once a week and get some food that the aunt had, and roll on the floor from pain because she hadn't eaten properly for the entire week before that. So one day she ran away, and that's a military crime. You're like a deserter. So then her mother pulled some strings and arranged for her to be called up to the front, and she ended up at the school. But if you look at them, if you if you look at them, these people that they're definitely not adults. They're really, really young people. They're teenagers. Um, who got sent there without having any knowledge of what a sniper is, just selected on the basis of their perfect eyesight. Uh, I think the following picture is the same.
Yeah.
This is a girl who survived 2 hungry winters in Leningrad, and
Wow.
several family members died, and her mother died on the way out of Leningrad, unfortunately. So she and her sister were left completely alone. Luckily, an aunt found them, and just as she started to recover a little bit, she put on a tiny bit of weight. She was no longer a skeleton, but still had a long way to go till she was well again. She also received the notice, and she definitely wasn't ready. She said that probably she would have volunteered afterwards because she wanted to take a revenge on the Germans for what they did to her family, but definitely not at that moment. However, she was the one that commented the most on the good food rations at the sniper school, and how the person who was on duty in the canteen would allow her to scrape the pots in the kitchen, and girls whose moms came to visit who'd give her some extra, an extra piece of bread or a potato, which she found really precious. And of course, with her, with everybody who'd survived terrible hunger, the food would play a central role in the interview. You mostly talked about food or ate or drank tea. So her perspective on the sniper school or time at the front was that it was not half as terrible as her time was in Leningrad. during
And
the
this
siege.
is what's fascinating about your talk is that you're debunking these not myths but these ideas that it's all about romanticism. It's all about it's often volunteers are just because they or people join up because they're hungry, because they want to eat better, and that reality of why you go to war, the girl looking for a husband on the battlefield, is very different to the romanticized idea of these female snipers we have from the comics and the video games. So we're learning a lot today. So I'll move on to this next person.
Thank you. And this girl, Claudia Loginova, who I went to see in Minsk, she also a couple of years from the time when this photo was taken, she was also in the army, and she was one of the most successful of them. She was one of the best snipers, and she was the one that did have a duel with a German sniper, and won.
Wow. So you can't just leave it that. You've got to explain a little bit more about that. You can't just drop that one and then move on. Tell us about the duel a little bit more.
She knew, she and her, because they worked in pairs, right? Snipers worked in pairs.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. Yeah,
we'll talk about that later. Yeah, they went to do their shift, and they were told that there's a German sniper at this sector, so watch out. And they were sitting and watching. Normally, one of them watches; the other one is taking a rest, because you just can't watch very intently for many hours. And she saw. I think she saw the barrel of the rifle or something like that. I don't remember exactly. I'm sorry. The book was written several years ago. So
no worries. It's a good reason, and it's good for mentioning it, folks. The links to the book is in the description below, and I definitely recommend you go out and buy it. It's what comes with Woody's recommendation. It's a fantastic read. So yeah, you can get the full details there.
So she spotted him, but he also, because she probably moved her rifle and the glass glistened, he spotted her, and she was very lucky because she was several fractions of a second quicker. So she shot him, and he hit the barrel of her rifle or something, but she survived, and she received a medal for that episode.
Wow, brilliant.
She was a wonderful woman, a truly wonderful woman. I'll speak about her later. Yeah, and now I'm coming to the person whom the book is dedicated, Anna Mulatova. She's on the left, who I was extremely lucky to meet, not only because she gave me absolutely precious insight into her work as a sniper, but also because she was a lovely, special person, really warm, with a wonderful sense of humor, a singer, dancer. It was extremely fortunate that I was living in Moscow at the time when I met her, and not very far from her. So whenever I could arrange babysitting, I'd go and see her, and we'd talk. She loved simple Russian food, like sandwiches with white bread and sausage, and we'd sit and talk. And she was in her late 80s, but she'd lie down on the carpet and show how to take aim. She'd talk about ballistics. She'd talk about the most important things for a sniper, because she was a good sniper. She was a simple village girl, but she was very, very bright, really intelligent. So she did the job, and she did the job extremely well. So it was just through her that I started to find out things about the sniper school and the training, and people that she'd met at the school. Some of them will be in the next picture, so I could briefly talk about them. So the two really famous girls that were the same year as Anna Mulatova at the sniper school were this one, Tatiana Baramzina, who surprised Anna as somebody who was allowed to serve in a sniper school, despite not having perfect eyesight. She was the only one that wore glasses while at the range training, and she became very famous posthumously because she stayed with some wounded men when her unit retreated, and she was they got captured, and she was terribly tortured by the Germans and then shot with an anti-tank rifle, I think. And for a long time, they didn't know who she was. She went down in the publications as a girl in a greatcoat, um, and later it turned out that it was her, Tatiana Baramzina. But of course, unfortunately, afterwards the propaganda picked her up, and stories written about her childhood, etc., and her being a perfect member of the Komsomol are not really true, sadly. And the second girl that Anna knew really well at the sniper school was the girl on the left in this picture. I'm so sorry, my presentation is total rubbish.
It's
Sorry.
fine. We're loving it. It's the information that's brilliant. Don't worry.
Yeah, and by the way, there are really good pictures in the book. Pictures in the book are really good quality.
Yeah, and people have said they've already bought it. People watching have already gone and bought it during the show. So you've made a few sales. So that's good.
Fantastic. And lucky. So the girl on the left, the tall girl, is called Rosa Shanina, who, unlike Pavlichenko, was a true sniper, and she was truly addicted to the profession. And she was described in a Soviet publication as a very beautiful girl, and feminine and all, whereas Anna remembered her as a rather masculine girl with a low voice and masculine gait, and quite sort of coarse and impolite. But then she went on to become a very good sniper, to do a lot of stories for the press, before she got killed in January 1945. And unfortunately for us, have left a really good diary, a fantastic diary, which shows what a complex personality she had, and what a complex thing it was to be for a woman to be a sniper in the war, and many things that I learned from others. For example, the terrible shock from the first kill, the terrible shock, and how important your sniper spare is. It's all there in her diary. I quote bits and pieces from it in the book, but I think it was published probably by Michael Leventhal, by his small publishing house, separately as a separate book. And it's a great read. It's a very, very, very interesting read. Scary as well. Her mother made a remark to Rosa's brother at the end of the war. She said, mother living in a small village by the White Sea, village woman, deep believer, deeply religious. She once said to Rosa's brother, it's lucky that Rosa got killed. How would she live after killing so many people? And the brother was completely shocked, because he saw his older sister, of course, his dead older sister, as a huge heroine.
Wow. Amazing stories, and we'll get later on to talk about the propaganda aspect of it, but we'll continue about the sniper school, and we got the bit about working in pairs. So by the time, as you said earlier, 1943, it's become an officially structured part of the Red Army, and there are these schools, things like that. So it's clearly born out of the need on the battlefield for these snipers. So and you mentioned the diary there that we had, but is there much in the way of the records of what was actually taught at these classes, and how structured it was, or was it kind of improvised because it was quite a new technology?
No, a lot is written. A lot of women left memoirs. Everybody was complaining about extremely harsh drills. Their teachers were brilliant. The Soviet Union did have extremely good military instructors.
Hmm.
Um, so they were taught very thoroughly. They learned ballistics. They did lots and lots of hours at the firing range. They were taught to march and to crawl and to ski. So most of them bitterly complain, especially the city girls, bitterly complain about extremely harsh training. Um, but of course, it proved precious when they found themselves at the front, and that's what several of their male teachers said to them when they were leaving. They said that they felt very sorry for them while they were training, but they did need the training badly, and many women mentioned that it was really really important for them that they had this training. Um,
And let's talk about the fact they work in pairs, because again, going back to my introduction, the image from the movies and the video games is these lone wolves, these single hunters going out there. That's the idea we've got from it, but it's actually not the case. You know, the marksmen, the snipers did work in pairs. So explain a bit more about the process.
I'm not sure about men. Probably it also was the case for men, but women, all the women worked in pairs. Um, uh, they explained it to me um, in the following way: but one is observing, and the other one rests. Um, or one is looking through the biners, and the other one is with the rifle. Um, I suppose it was more convenient because also to spend the day on your own at the front line is uh, uh, is very very tough, because they were normally separate from the other soldiers. They'd sit in a special place. They'd be separated. And this thing about sniper spares, probably those people in the audience who know something about psychology would be able to explain why it was the biggest tragedy of all to lose a sniper spare.
Mm.
Um, Most actually, the casualties were so high that many women who I'd interviewed uh, would say. Uh, would say that they have lost not one but two or three pairs, um, and it was very funny. It was very strange to hear these women in their late 80s speak about this 18, 19-year-old girl uh, who used to be their pair, who didn't live to be 20,
Mm.
uh, speak about her uh, as an equal. Do you know what I mean? It's really strange because these girls were younger than their grandchildren, or maybe
Mm.
even great grandchildren. Uh, but each of them would talk about the skilled sniper spares and say the phrase uh, that I find quite disturbing because I can't explain it. I'd love to know what it means. Let's say she was killed and now I'm living instead of her. What
Mm.
is this? Is this survivor's guilt? Um, and they were very, very close. They'd spend the day together. They'd sleep together on one great coat and cover themselves with the other great coat. They'd share their food. They'd talk about they'd know everything probably about their lives. Uh, Normally the first pair they got at the sniper school, so they trained together. They traveled to the war together, and quite often this pair got killed on the very first days, because in the first days they don't watch out, they're not careful. There were many stories when the other girl immediately got killed, like like Kaleris by Masha Schwartz. Um, and then it's the whole thing about um, organizing a decent burial and finding flowers or at least some branches of trees and no coffins, of course, but they'll wrap them in a ground sheet, so it was more or less looking decent. Uh, when they couldn't bury the friend, it was something that upset them very much, that traumatized them greatly. Uh, so these stories are one of the most moving. This pair, Sniper Space, it was the same, by the way, for pilots and pilots and navigators.
And we'll have to bring you back on at some point in the future to talk about the pilots. But I want to thank you personally for bringing it down to the loss of a sniper partner, because a lot of the programming on World War II TV, when we talk about the Eastern Front, is about the scale. I did a 3-part series with Nigel Askey this one about the Russian casualty report. So it was millions here, hundreds of thousands there, thousands there. And it's very hard to relate to this experience of the Eastern Front when you're talking about fronts of 30 divisions at a time. But what you're doing, bringing it down to one very well-trained expert losing their best friend, their partner, the other half of themselves, in a sense, in the battlefield, is making it much more understandable for the viewers to take on board what the Eastern Front is all about. So thank you very much. So another photo, another pair of snipers.
Yes, these girls did not study at the central school. They were called up to a small school or classes for snipers in the south of Russia, in Kropotkin, near Krasnodar, southern Russia, and given quite a quick, vigorous but quick training, and then sent to Sovny Kerch, where they'd spent several months sitting in the catacombs in a huge underground caves before the Soviet side started the advance. So the girl in the upper picture, Katya Peredera, she kept saying, when I met her in Krasnodar when she was almost 90, she kept saying that despite being very terrible this time in the catacombs, with not a lot of food and almost no water, with terrible problems with water, was in fact fun thanks to Zhenya, to her best friend Zhenya Makeeva, who had a wonderful sense of humor, was a singer, a dancer. She remembers her jokes. Zhenya would say that it's okay. It's okay that there's no water to wash one's faces because it's dark anyway in the caves. This sort of thing, and use any opportunity to lift the spirits of those around her. And Zhenya was killed as soon as the Soviet side started the advance. She was shot through the heart, probably by a German sniper. Definitely by a German sniper, actually, because he immediately wounded Katya as well, splitting her heel, the heel of her foot, crippling her for life. So she lamented afterwards that she never buried Zhenya herself, her best friend. And she spent a year, probably more than a year, in the hospitals, and she had a severe limp for life. She was basically a cripple, but she did live a life. She had success. She had many friends. She never lost her spirits. And as she had promised herself, she had a daughter and called her Zhenya in honor of her friend.
Wow.
And she did come back to the place, and she found the place where Zhenya was killed. So it's a great story. So yes, one of the first things they tell you is about this other girl who got killed.
No, definitely. Again, the people are amazed that you actually met these women and you spoke to these people and understood their stories from them directly. But we're going to move on to some of the battlefields, because one of the things that often comes up on this channel is when you're talking about something like snipers or commandos or things that is actually measuring their success. He's actually saying what influence did it actually have on the battlefield, because there is some data, but it's not always available. But you have some specific stories in your book about where snipers made differences and which particular battlefields they fought at. So take us through what the maps we're looking at over the next couple of images.
This was just to illustrate the story of Katya and Zhenya, whose picture I just showed, just to show that indeed the advance was extremely hard. They had to advance in this extremely complicated area. And the next map, I think the next map is
Front,
is Operation Bagration, where the snipers from the second year of the sniper school in Podolsk started their career in the spring of 1944. They arrived at the front near Orsha, which is on the very right of the picture, and for a while they were waiting. The advance did not begin till a couple months later. So they were working in the defense. They were working as snipers. They learned to be very careful. Learned the hard way. Unfortunately, they saw the first corpses, the first blood. They suffered the first sexual abuse. So by the time the advance began, there were hardened soldiers. Others that were still there were truly hardened soldiers, and most of them had scored several kills already.
And but when we get to the 1944 to 45 era, generally there are better archives. There's more information because the replacement of officers is a little bit less. So when you were writing the book, as I said a minute ago, that quantify exactly what results were achieved. Did the Red Army keep statistics of the sniper influence on the battlefield and how much difference it made there?
Yes, there were statistics. I think one of the pictures in the presentation shows a sniper's book, the little book where they write down their kills. So there was statistic. What the Red Army did not have is there it is, yes. And interestingly, it says 22 FR, which stands for Fritz, which is an unofficial derogatory name for German. That's what it is. The reason why it's 22 here, because normally it would be 1 or 2 every now and then. The reason why it's 22 there is that she'd lost her previous book, or it was destroyed, and then she was given a new one, and the number was taken from the regiment's records. So yes, there had been records. There was a statistic, but what does not exist is a special statistics for women.
Right.
We don't know don't even know the exact numbers of women in the Red Army. Some scholars say 600,000, others say 1 million. So unfortunately, we don't know how many snipers there had been, and we don't know the score of female snipers.
Okay.
So we have to try and work it out on the basis of individual stories, which is what I'm trying to.
Yeah. Oh, well, you've done very well. So we've got a few more slides to go, and people are loving it, which is fantastic. So, yeah, the German POW in Minsk. So tell us about this.
Yes, I was going to tell you a story about this favorite sniper of mine, my friend Anna Mulatova, who after the advance did start, she'd lost her first pair. The first sniper's pair got killed, and with the second pair, they were taking part in combing through the forest, looking for the with Tasia. Yes, that's the second girl. Um, looking for those Germans in the encirclement who had not yet surrendered, because it was a very big encirclement near Minsk, and huge numbers were captured. So they were, because snipers in the advance, snipers are given different roles. They're foot soldiers, they're nurses, etc., couriers, but they don't work. There's no jobs for a sniper when the unit is advancing. So Anya was with a small group uh, walking through the forest, looking for the German soldiers. There were lots of little individual groups and big groups as well, and then she had one of the scariest experiences of her entire life. They came to a clearing, and they saw several soldiers get killed while trying to cross this clearing. They realized that there was a sniper sitting on the other side, and Anna, because she was trained to spot snipers. She saw a flash when yet another shot was fired. She saw a flash. So she told to the head of the group that she knows where he is and can she go. So she crawled. It gives me goosebumps, actually. I remember her telling the story. She crawled. She got to that point. She thought that probably that's the place where she'd see him in front of her when she gets to her feet, which she did, and she saw him much closer than she'd expected. He probably was some 10 meters away. An older guy, older, did she say middle age? She did say something like that, and he was probably in his early 30s, with reddish hair and a stubble. He was lying in a puddle because it was very hot, and she thought that lice probably also were torturing him, because they were all terribly lice infested, and most of them. So he was lying in a little puddle, sort of puddle of water. His sniper's rifle aimed on the other side of the clearing, and she shouted "Hände hoch," and he turned to her. And she didn't give him any time. She said to me that it didn't occur to her that she could have captured him. She could have taken him alive, simply because he seemed so dangerous. He'd just killed several people right in front of her, and she shot. She fired at him, and he was so close that she got splattered with his blood. Her tunic and face got splattered with his blood. So she was standing there shaking, and then her comrades from her group ran up to her, and the officer said to her, "Oh, that's you that smashed him. Well done. Go wash your face." And she was trying to process that she had just killed this person, because it turns out that killing them at 300 meters is a completely different thing than killing them at 10 meters. You suddenly realize what you've done. And she said that his face haunted her till the end of her days. This man haunted her.
Wow.
Yeah, and then they went on. The next group of Germans had no intention to fight. Some 30 Germans who sat under the tree waiting to be captured. And she told me how she felt disgusted when soldiers started searching their pockets, taking their watches and stuff. Yeah, but then she she thought, but still it's much better than they would be shot here and now. It's much better this way. One of them approached her and gave her a little golden watch that he'd looted somewhere also. And she realized that he was hoping that she would protect him. She would protect them.
Wow.
That a woman would have pity and protect them. She
What
kept
an
the
amazing
watch.
story.
Yeah. And then we come to Suwalki, where again after the quick advance through Belarus, they stopped again on the border of East Prussia for several months at this settlement called Suwalki, and where they again for the last time did a lot of work as snipers. Anna Mulatova told about one mistake that she made that nearly cost her life. She with Tasia, they were sitting in the trench feeling quite bored because nothing was happening. The Germans were afraid of them, and nobody would show above the edge of the trench. So they spotted a house with a straw roof where sometimes they saw a figure passing by. It was at quite a distance, so it was no use trying to shoot a soldier. But Anya decided to set the roof on fire. Why not? They had these incendiary bullets. So she fired one, and she saw that it started to smolder a little bit, but did not catch fire. And she immediately sent another bullet into the barrel and shot. And the German sniper who spotted her when she fired the first shot fired at the same time as her. And suddenly she felt this colossal shock and felt warm liquid pouring down her face. It was blood, and she thought she was 19 years old. She thought, "Oh my God, I'm dead! I'm dead. Must be dead." And she screamed to Tasia, "Oh, Tasia, I'm dying!" And when the soldiers came running, they said, "No, actually, it's okay. It's just a small fragment of a bullet, of an explosive bullet, of doom doom, hit your skin, just cut your skin. It's nothing." Wow. And she, this pretty young girl, was sitting there crying because he'd smashed the butt of her rifle. Where would she get a new rifle? And soldiers. Older infantry soldiers, old enough to be her fathers, were trying to console her and say that it's nothing. But of course, the main reason for her crying was she made a mistake that no sniper is allowed to ever make. You never fire twice from the same place. So this was an episode that she was ashamed of.
Wow, incredible story. So we're back to Rosa again.
Yeah, I put this. I've added this picture to the presentation to illustrate an entry in Rosa's diary from I think the summer of 1944. Yeah. Saying that all of my friends have got married, which meant that everybody by then had a boyfriend. And these boyfriends, the campaign husbands, the officers, often would take a girl to their unit, would transfer a girl to their unit. Many stopped working as snipers at that stage. Because in fact, by that time, the phenomenon of campaign wives became so common in the Red Army that it spread from the very top officers to the rank of a captain, for example. So most of them had boyfriends, Um, uh, and Rosa was very angry about that. She said that yes, of course, you can have an affair, you can date somebody, but you should not forget what your job here is. But of course, there were young women, and sometimes it was the best option for them to have a protection of an officer from other men. And many did fall in love, like the girl in the middle with a bunch of flowers, Sasha, uh, uh, who Sasha, was it Sasha or was it Lida? Sasha Ikimva, who got pregnant and got killed, slaughtered by the Germans when she went on her last mission, during her last mission. And in fact, only two of them, only two of these six girls survived the war. Just to give you an idea of the
Wow.
casualties. Um, so fighting not on the Soviet territory was a different time for them. They were seeing new lands, they were getting new experiences. They had hope that they will survive. They really wanted to survive, and many of them were in love. And of course, we can say what we want, but some of these love affairs were true love affairs, and uh, uh, the girls, of course, were hoping that the men would stay with them after the war. Of course, they were worried that the man either had a family back home, or would find somebody young and beautiful and innocent who hadn't been through this hell.
Mm.
Uh, so that they had their hopes and they had their worries. But of course, they did not expect the treatment that they got after coming back from the war, which I will speak about later.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another photo.
Um, this picture is also about the end of the war and what it was like for them and their hopes. Uh, this girl was thought dead by her comrades from the regiment because she was taken away with a severe wound. She'd lost one eye, and her face was severely disfigured. So she'd only pose for photographs showing one side of her face, Bella. And it's very touching that the boy, the young man who was in love with her in the regiment, remained true to her and married her, found her and married her after the war. And they had a happy life together. Um, yeah, somehow I've moved from the war to the end of the war and what they
Although
were.
that's important, that's because I think again going back to the mythology we have about this, I think my image of the female snipers is very much defending the territory, defending the Soviet Union. I don't tend to think of the advance going on post Bagration towards Germany and the fact that these snipers carried on outside of Soviet soil, and I don't know that I've ever really, until I read your book, gave the coming home much of a thought as well. So we had this photo up before because we had the sniper diary up there, but tell us about this lady.
Uh, this is the daughter of an enemy of the people. The father perished in the gulag, and mother was also purged. So she never thought that she would be decorated with military medals, and that she would write her name on the Reichstag. She wrote this girl wrote her name on the Reichstag. Um, uh, and she came back. She survived.
Wow.
I just love this picture because she was so beautiful as well. This childish,
Yeah, very innocent looking. Yeah.
lovely face. Yes, very innocent.
And we have a couple of questions for you. So David K is asking, did female Soviet soldiers receive the same pay level as their male counterparts?
They did, yes. The money that they received was according to the rank, because these girls were not professional military. Um, they did not have higher ranks, except for probably some military doctors who sometimes were in the rank of colonel even. But these girls were a corporal, a private or a corporal, so they did not get a lot of money, but it was the same money
It's
as
the
the
same as
men.
the men. Okay, and Kevin is asking, was there a special snipers medal struck for the snipers?
That's a very good question. I don't think so, but I'm pretty sure there must have been a badge. Let me check and get back to you on that. It's a very good question. Thank you very
I
much.
believe they had a sniper's badge for being proficient, but I don't think there was the medals they received were the same medal as anybody got for bravery. I don't think there was that's my take on it. But and so this devastation after war, I think it's a very fascinating subject to end on. Is that life wasn't always rosy after 1945? So explain a bit more.
Now, the thing was, at the front, of course, they did not have a clear picture of what was happening back home because there was a censorship. So they'd received letters with half a page crossed in black ink. So they had no idea. It was only when they crossed. No, of course they could imagine, but they could not have imagined that that was so bad. So when they crossed the border, going back home, they finally realized how terrible it was. They saw on trains going through Belarus, for example, they saw not even women plowing land using a cow. They saw women harnessed into the plows because there were
Wow.
no cows left. There was nothing. So it were they saw entire burnt villages. Belarus was a partisan land where Germans would burn and slaughter entire population of entire villages. So the survivors were living in dugouts and dragging the plows. It was just unimaginably hard. By the way, some women who had been captured or Ostarbeiters, they were told when they were still in Germany, they were warned to not go back because of the terrible devastation, and also because the authorities were not going to be very, very friendly towards them, and they didn't believe and came back and ended up in the Gulag. Um, but that's another story. It's another book, I guess. So this situation here in this picture is not the worst of what they'd seen upon coming back. And of course, there were no men left out of the whole generation of young men born, for example, in 1923. 3% survived. So they'd come. One of the snipers, Vera Chukova, who lived near Yaroslavl, in a big village. It was a village of 250 houses. She said that 5 young men came back from the war.
Wow.
5 of her contemporaries came back. So unless they'd found a husband in the army, there was no one to marry. A devastation, extremely hard work, and unfortunately, the society being so conservative, they were in many cases treated as prostitutes by their neighbors. They were told by the neighbors, "You'd been in the army, you'd slept with lots of men. Don't you look at my sons?" And it was so bad, especially in the countryside. In the city, you can somehow hide or move. In the country, in the village, you are there. You're completely exposed. So in fact, up until Brezhnev's time, because Brezhnev being a frontovik, he again brought them back from the oblivion and gave them medals, and they started to organize meetings of snipers, etc. Till that time, most of them would not even talk that they had been at the front. they would hide their medals. They would keep it a secret. The husbands would beg with them to not talk about it because they somehow felt it was a stain on their honor.
Wow.
And that's just so heartbreaking. That's so cynical. Um, these girls coming back, feeling that that they're centuries older than their contemporaries, that they've been through hell. Um, um, uh, and finding this treatment after the war, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, that I think is a fantastic way to a sad but fantastic and appropriate way to end the show, because we talked about the beginning about this mythology, the video games, the movies and things, and you kind of rolled your eyes there. And as you've kind of reminded us, brought us crashing down to earth, is the reality for a lot of these women is coming back to a country that was devastated, to a story they can't really share with people, to kind of to difficulties, and also PTSD, isn't it? We could do a whole subject about the scars these women came back with emotionally. I mean, you mentioned the loss of a partner as well. So, one final question for you is what are you working on next? Because you've written about the snipers, you've written about the night witches and the females who served in the Air Force. What next in terms of studying the World War II?
Um, I'm rather I'm rather tempted to write a book about Africa, but probably my agent will not be very happy about that. But I do have a plan for another book on women and war, on war through the eyes of civilian women.
Wow.
Uh, but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, we definitely like you to come back and talk about some other aspect. It's been a fantastic, and the fact that there haven't been that many questions, I think, is people have just been fascinated by the whole thing. You've taken us through it from beginning to end, and it's been really, really an absolute pleasure talking to you. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope we can arrange another show at some point in the future.
I hope so. Thanks so
Okay.
much for having me.
Thank you. So this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying I will see you all again tomorrow, folks. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for your questions, and thank you to my guests. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye.